If you're on Twitter, you know this next story, Joe Biden's great fall. I'm not speaking metaphorically, this actually happened. The US president was in Colorado on Thursday. He was attending a graduation ceremony at the US Air Force Academy. He handed out diplomas. He spoke to the graduates. But afterwards, this happened. Take a look. There was a sandbag next to Biden. He tripped on it and fell on stage. Could have happened to anyone. But when you're 80 years old and running for re-election, you are not just anyone. And that's Biden's problem. Republicans have repeatedly questioned his physical and mental ability. They say he is unfit for office. And the president himself has not helped his cause. He has mixed up people in public events, forgotten names.
And I want to thank all of you here for including bipartisan elected officials like Representative Governor, Senator Braun, Senator Booker, Representative Jackie. Are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here.
And also fallen off a cycle.
Dr. Biden, how was anniversary? It's coming.
These are things that can happen to the best of us. They don't disqualify Biden, but in the United States, presidential health is a political lightning rod. Donald Trump faced his share of criticism. Biden is now facing his. The White House says the president is unhurt. This is how Biden himself reacted to the fall.
I got sandbags. No breaking. Go.
He says he got sandbagged, but far-right commentators are not buying it. They say Biden should retire from politics. And what about the Republicans? What are they saying? Well, that's the surprise. Donald Trump spoke at a rally on Thursday. He addressed Joe Biden's fall, but not in a way you would expect. Listen to this.
He actually fell down? Well, I hope he wasn't hurt. I hope he wasn't hurt. But the whole thing is crazy. You got to be careful about that. You got to be careful about that because you don't want that. Even if you have to tiptoe down a ramp, you got to tiptoe. It's like an ice skate.
How about that? No nasty dig at his health, no insulting comments. Trump is hoping Biden was not hurt. What explains this? Well, Trump himself is in the same boat as Biden. He's 76 years old, and there have been multiple concerns about his health too. Let me show you what happened in 2020. Donald Trump was attending a similar graduation event at West Point. Look at how he walked down the ramp afterwards. That incident was highly scrutinized. So will this one involving Biden. After all, it's a public issue. The president is the most powerful person in the United States, perhaps even the world. So their health will always be political. And to make matters worse, both these leaders are older than their predecessors. Biden will be 86 if he completes a second term. Trump will be 82. Do you know what the average retirement age in the US is? Around 62. So should the person with the nuclear codes be 80? That's a choice for Americans to make. But I think the largest story here isn't the fall. That could have happened to anyone. The largest story is the disconnect between American leaders and voters. The median age in the US is 38. Biden and Trump are more than twice that. They clashed once in 2020 for the presidency. Chances are they will clash again in 2024. What does that tell you about US politics? That it remains a club for old white men. I know experience is important in politics, but at what point does experience become a generational burden? I would say right about now. The median age of US president has been 55 when they took office. Biden is 80, Trump is 76. That rise is what America should be talking about, not Joe Biden's fall. Debt is a superpower's kryptonite. It seems so from the looks of it, because both the US and China are struggling with the same issue. The US seems to have narrowly avoided a crisis, but China is not out of the woods yet. Let's start with America. The US Congress has finally passed the debt ceiling bill. The House passed it earlier this week, and on Thursday, the Senate passed it. 63 senators voted in support, while 36 opposed. The rest is up to Joe Biden. Once he signs the bill, it becomes law. It will officially suspend America's debt ceiling until January 2025, meaning after the next presidential election. Now, experts say the US dodged a bullet because they have never defaulted in their history. So it's impossible to predict what would have happened. Chances are total chaos. That doomsday scenario has for now been averted. The US Treasury can now issue bonds and raise funds. All in all, good news. Now let's turn to China. They're facing a debt crisis on two fronts. One is external lending. Xi Jinping's Belt and Road project loans are reportedly soaring. And second is local government debt. Let's focus on external lending first. The Rhodium Group has analyzed China's BRI debt since the pandemic. Here's what they found. From 2017 to 2019, China renegotiated loans worth $17 billion. If you think that's a lot, think again. Because in the next 3 years, they renegotiated loans worth $76.8 billion, a sum total of 3 years. That's 2020, 21, and 2022. The reasons are obvious. The COVID-19 pandemic led to economic ruin. That was followed by higher inflation due to the Ukraine war. So many BRI countries could not repay, and the result, China had to renegotiate the loans. In some cases, even write it off completely. As a matter of fact, 2020 seems to have been the worst year, because China renegotiated loans worth $48 billion. What do these numbers say? That Xi Jinping's grand plan is failing. He spent billions to gain influence around the world, but he's ended up bankrupting the global south. And here's the catch. The blowback won't be limited to the borrowers alone. China too will feel the heat. On paper, they have the biggest pile of foreign exchange reserves, close to $3.2 trillion in April. But a good chunk of that is tied up in loans. Plus, the recent trade data is worrisome. If you want to build your forex, you need to export more. You sell more, you get dollars in return. And that's not happening. China's exports grew at almost 15% in March, but that pace came down to 8.5% in April. The result, China's corporate and retail banks saw net outflows in the last quarter. They bled foreign exchange. Where does that leave the BRI? In a lot of trouble. If China doesn't have enough capital at home, how can they lend abroad? The numbers reflect this problem. By 2019, China was lending $100 billion every year under the BRI. Now, between 60 and 70 billions. So the project has certainly lost momentum. It's also lost participants. Italy was the only G7 member in the Belt and Road. But the new government is having a rethink. Their agreement with China expires in 2024. Reports say it won't be renewed. So that's the external debt problem. Now the internal one. The same group, Rhodium, has done a study, and here's what they found. Half of China's cities have trouble servicing their debt. Now, debt service is pretty simple. It covers payments you have to make on loans, like interest payments. Half of China's cities are finding it hard to do that. Their debt service cost is more than 10% of their income. Let me simplify that for you. Assume your income is $100, but you also have a loan. Every month you must pay $10 as interest. So what's your debt service cost? $10 out of 100, which is 10%. Experts say that's too high for local governments. But the question is, how did this happen? Chinese cities have seen lower income for two reasons. One is the pandemic restrictions. Zero COVID was a nightmare for China's economy. The second was the property crisis. Remember the whole Evergrande fiasco? That led to lower tax and land sale revenue. So China has two options now. It can either generate more revenue to service the debt, or it must restructure. The first one will be hard to do. China's investment and manufacturing data is not encouraging. Their pre-pandemic GDP growth was around 7% and now just around 5%. No GDP growth, no income. And no income means no debt payments. That's the trouble for China. Their lending was pinned on the idea of never-ending prosperity. Xi Jinping could not conceive of a slowdown in China, but that's exactly what's happened. And he's now facing a ticking debt bomb. Speaking of trade and trouble, there's another conflict brewing in China, this time around cosmetics. The European Union is concerned about China's new rules. They believe it will expose trade secrets. First, some background. Europe is among the biggest producers of cosmetic products. Some big names like L'Oreal and LVMH are based there. And how big is this industry? Well, in 2019, it was worth $123 billion. You see, cosmetics is a special market. Everyone cannot make these products. You need specific ingredients. You need special techniques and formulas. These are closely guarded secrets of companies. L'Oreal will have its own trade secrets. So will LVMH or Coty. If those secrets are revealed, they will lose their advantage. Anybody could make those products. From the looks of it, that's what China wants. They are introducing new laws for cosmetic products. Companies have been asked to reveal a lot, like their ingredients, their manufacturing process, even the source of raw materials, and their formulas. The plan is to collect this data and store in a Chinese database. On paper, it's for safety, to ensure that cosmetic products don't cause harm. Do other countries do this? To some extent, yes. But China's laws go above and beyond. It's not about health and safety. It's about learning trade secrets. They have done this before. Many countries have accused China of stealing intellectual property, and every time it's the same strategy. Bring in new regulations, ask foreign companies to share more information, and when you have enough, start producing your own. It's a gross violation of trade rules. The question is, why do these companies play along? Because China is a huge market. It is home to 1.4 billion people. More than half of them are aspirational middle-class families, and China is weaponizing them. Beijing knows foreign companies cannot afford to leave China. That includes European cosmetic giants. China is the third biggest export destination, second biggest for market leader L'Oreal. North Asia makes up around $10 billion of their sales. So walking away is not an option. Then what is? Some Western experts have been asking for tit-for-tat actions. Give China a taste of its own medicine. Ask Chinese companies to disclose more information. It's certainly possible, but chances are it would lead to a breakdown in trade ties, maybe even a trade war. In many ways, that's already happening. The West has been talking about de-risking from China, about moving supply chains out of China and also booting out Chinese firms. Huawei is a big example of that push. Most Western nations have removed Huawei from their 5G network. Now coming back to cosmetics. There's no proof that the new rules are part of a grand conspiracy. But we know China's track record. IP theft is a consistent allegation against them, which is why the European Union is concerned. They have raised the issue multiple times with Chinese officials, but so far there's been no breakthrough. Now, what comes to your mind when you think of Bali? Turquoise blue waters, scenic beaches, buzzing nightclubs, essentially the perfect tourist destination. Bali relies heavily on tourism. People visit the island from across the world. But what happens when these tourists become unruly? Bali is reeling from a number of shocking tourist scandals and has now issued a list of do's and don'ts. Our next report tells you all about this travel advisory. If you're traveling to Bali anytime soon, make sure to keep this in mind.
Tourist deported over a nude photo on sacred tree. German tourist strips naked at Bali temple performance. Bali tourist arrested after exposing genitals. For the island of gods, that is some ungodly behavior. Bali is known for its beaches and parties, but it looks like unruly tourists are its Achilles heel. From tourists dancing naked at temples to some even exposing themselves on public transport, The island nation is dealing with a lot of unruly tourists, and the Hindu-majority island is worried about this growing trend. So Bali has issued a new set of rules, a list of do's and don'ts for foreign tourists. The list may sound generic, like respect for sacred spaces in the country, politeness, complying with traffic rules, etc. But the don'ts is where Bali is putting its foot down. The list is long and specific. No trespassing on sacred land. No climbing sacred trees. No engaging in behavior that defiles sacred places. No use of single-use plastics. No uttering offensive words and acting aggressively towards others. And not engaging in work without proper permits. Bali relies heavily on tourism. The COVID-19 pandemic hit the island's economy heavily. So, Bali is trying to bring tourism back to the island. But at what cost? Income from foreigners is crucial, but what about Bali's culture? Its own sacred heritage and customs. What happens when tourists cannot respect that? That is the question Bali is grappling with right now. Authorities, however, seem to have had enough. Unruly tourists have become the norm, and the new advisory aims to curb this. They're also contemplating a bike ban. They plan to ban tourists and other foreigners renting motorbikes. So, if riding a bike through Bali's paddy fields was on your travel list, it could soon remain just a dream. But if you're heading to Bali anytime soon, remember two things: respect the rules and have fun.
Now let's talk about the world in general. Our planet is ill. This is according to scientists at Earth Commission. It's a Sweden-based climate research group. They've published a new study. It details how 7 out of 8 planetary safety limits have been breached. The co-chair of the group, Professor Joyita Gupta, gave an analogy. She described what would happen if the Earth went to a doctor. A doctor would say that the Earth is really quite sick right now, and it is sick in terms of many different areas or systems, and this sickness is also affecting the people living on Earth. Now you already know about climate change, how humans have been wrecking the planet, how our unending use of fossil fuels is ruining the world. The Earth Commission's new study looks a little deeper. It's not just about the tipping point. Instead of only looking at when the world will end, it looks at human suffering. Look at this chart. It's a bit complicated, I know. I'll simplify it for you. The 8 slices are the 8 planetary safety limits. The little Earth symbol shows where we are regarding those limits. As you can see, the Earth is far beyond the safe zone in 6 out of those categories. Only for one metric are we still in the clear. That's aerosols. It's an indicator of air pollution. Overall, the global air quality is fine. Some cities like New Delhi and Shanghai might disagree, but according to the study, those are local issues. Overall, the global air quality is not in danger yet, and aren't we glad about that? There's also another category where we aren't completely in the red. Surprisingly enough, climate. But as always, there's a catch. The climate limit is not absolute. It's broken into a safe limit and a just limit. The safe limit is the absolute boundary, denoted by 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. That's the global warming danger zone. It was agreed upon during the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement talks. If the world crosses the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold, we are all in grave danger. The polar ice caps will melt, forests will burn, cyclones will destroy the coasts. You know, the beginning of the end. But that's not the only thing that the scientists focused on. They also looked at the just limit. This is 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That's when the entire world is not doomed, but heading that way. Humans end up suffering when the temperature crosses the 1 degree Celsius level. Extreme weather events become more common. Droughts, wildfires, and cyclones all become more common and deadly, something that is already happening. People in vulnerable regions begin getting affected, mostly through no fault of their own. It's unjustified suffering. That's why it's called the just limit. And we have breached this just limit. Like we said, certain parts of the world are already facing the consequences. So which parts are we talking about? Mostly the developing world. Think about the devastating floods in Pakistan last year, the massive cyclones hitting Bangladesh and Myanmar, drought in the Horn of Africa. Of course, the effects of climate crisis aren't limited to these areas. Europe is suffering too. Heat waves and wildfires have become common there lately, and the danger will continue to spread. There's one small ray of hope though. The Earth Commission says we can get better. We can cure the sickness. But for that, people have got to start taking action. Governments need to come together to fix these problems. If we don't, then the Earth's illness may become terminal. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with Texas, where flash floods have inundated entire highways. In Jerusalem, thousands descended on the streets to celebrate Pride Month. This is the first Pride March held under the hard-right Netanyahu government. In Jordan, royal wedding bells are ringing. Crown Prince Hussein married Rajwa Al Saif, a Saudi architect. Royals and the heads of states from across the world attended this grand wedding. What makes June 2nd significant? Taking you back in history, on this day in 1953, Queen Elizabeth II was crowned at London's Westminster Abbey. It was the first coronation to be televised. Millions watched the proceedings on live television for the first time. Queen Elizabeth II went on to become the longest reigning monarch in British history. And watch Flashback with Palki Sharma on Saturday at 8 p.m. India time.
For centuries, Tibet and China had coexisted. They fought, they made up. But they never tried to crush each other's spirit. That changed in 1949 when communists took over China. Mao Zedong unleashed fury on his neighbor. He burned down monasteries, slaughtered soldiers, and executed monks. Catch the story of Tibet's invasion on Flashback.
We leave you with this. Thank you so much for watching.
Upon the high altar had been placed the coronation regalia, whose central piece is the crown of St. Edward, placed upon the head of the sovereign at the actual ceremony of crowning. With becoming...
Poor people. So this is West Texas. I'm about, and it's completely washed. Two vehicles right up to the side, and it's pushed.
The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, Here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.